Welcome to another episode of TalkINFOSEC. My name is Clinton Walker and I've got my colleague here, Colin from Nexor, again, covering the areas of cyber essentials and what that is for SMEs and how they can go about getting certified. Colin, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon, Clinton. It's good to be back again.
Yes, here again and sharing knowledge and helping others to get off their feet with cyber essentials. So today's topic, Colin, is covering cyber essentials. And just for the audience, just to give some context, what is cyber essentials and why is it important for businesses?
Yeah, so Cyber Essentials is a standard that was put in place by the UK government, having worked with industry and the National Cybersecurity Centre 5 or 6 years ago. And it's designed to protect a company against the most common security attacks. In short, it consists of 5 areas of control that you really must meet, the essentials. And by doing that, if you're not doing those essential things, you're really making it easy pickings for the criminals.
Okay. So the message is in the word essentials, right? Those are the bare bones, so to speak.
Exactly that.
Yeah. Okay.
I liken it to the real world where we have sort of a thief walking down the street trying every single car door handle. If they find the car's unlocked, they're going to steal what's inside. If they can see your valuables, they're going to break the window and take the valuables. And we've learned to lock our cars and hide our valuables. And that's what Cyber Essentials is about, doing the same level of basic security, the essentials for your business.
Sure. So surely there are different components and different aspects of that. So what are some of the different tiers within the Cyber Essentials and what do they mean in practice for businesses who are looking to get certified with a baseline with regards to Cyber Essentials?
Yeah, so there are 2 tiers. There's Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. So the baseline tier Cyber Essentials is a self-assessment scheme and is really designed to just make you stop and think about the security controls in your business.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, with CEO commitment, the self-certification assessment has to be signed by your CEO to say, yeah, we've put these controls in place in the business. And it's really up to you as a business to decide what level of robustness that you go through that process.
Sure.
Cyber Essentials Plus is where there's then a third-party technical validation that those controls are effective. So it's not a full audit, but it's some verification tests that they will run. And if you've implemented the controls in the way that you say you've done, you'll pass those tests with no problem. So that has a sort of higher external value. It's not just you making a claim, it's been verified by an approved third party.
Okay. So on one hand, the CEO is the main person who signs and said, yeah, I'm self-certifying myself or self-assuring. So question on that point then, can the CEO delegate that responsibility and be in the background to say, well, I'm sponsoring it, I'm supporting it, here you go, my deputy, you sign that off? Does that go?
Absolutely, and that's the way I think you would expect most companies to deal with it. But it's really that executive level sponsorship that I'm committing to the resources and the policies that are needed to put this level of security in place.
Sure.
And yes, finding the right people in the business to implement the relevant controls.
Yeah, so again, to pick up on another point that you made, Colin, you talked about the technical assessment and verification, which is a bit more involved. What are some of those technical aspects? Is it that someone will come in and do a stress test on your firewall, your network security, do a penetration testing? How does that work to help give you that deeper level of insight to say, hey, you've met these criteria?
Yeah. So going back to my example, is that they'll do the cyber equivalent of the thief walking down the road and testing your door handles.
Yeah.
So they will. So the verification will do a very simple penetration test to see if you've got any doors open into your business.
Yes.
There will then be typically a vulnerability scan from inside the business. and that's quite a technical thing, but is really making sure that you've implemented some of the controls properly, such as updated all of your systems, all running on the latest versions of software and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But they'll also try some of the locks, if you like, by one of the things that you need to do is prevent executable files from coming into the business. So they'll try a few sample things like emailing a test account and execute an executable file and making sure it gets blocked.
Okay.
So it really is those simple things of just trying the simple ways people would try and get into your organization and making sure those doors are firmly shut.
Sure, sure. Okay, okay. So from an SME perspective, how easy it is to achieve this, both from a financial perspective and a practical perspective, because SMEs are classed up to 250 employees, but you and I know that an SME can be 5 people, 10 people, 15 people, and they don't really have a network or a structure as such as a big company. They just work on a normal route, maybe from home. How do they actually get through the nitty-gritty of those different elements that you referred to earlier? How easy is it for an SME to achieve this?
So that's kind of a hard one to answer of how easy it is, and because it really depends on where you're starting from.
Okay.
So if you're a company that has taken its responsibilities in security seriously, maybe in the past put a lot of effort into your data protection controls because of GDPR, then you're probably in a really good starting place. So this should be relatively easy. So our experience has shown that a company that's got good controls would typically, as you go through Cyber Essentials, there might be 1 or 2 things that just make you stop and think, do we really do that? Yeah. But with just a few simple corrections, then you're generally in a good place. Mm-hmm. However, if you at a much earlier level of maturity than that, and you don't have those controls in place yet, it certainly will be more challenging. To some extent, I'd argue that's good because it shows the standard's doing its job. It's caused you to stop, think, and reflect on what should your business's security posture be. But I'd argue if committed, and I think this is again really important why it requires CEO sponsorship, if committed with CEO sponsorship and people and resources are made available, we find that most SMEs can get there in a few months.
Okay. That's great, because I mean, people see, most SMEs will potentially see this as a cost to the business and not getting much value. But I guess on the flip side, you could say, well, look at the cost of remediation and fixing an issue if you were to miss one simple aspect of that area. So here's another question again in terms of comparison, how SMEs probably will be thinking, some of them, why waste time in Cyber Essentials? I mean, ISO 27001 seems to be around for quite a while. It's the de facto in the industry. How do you weigh that up? On one hand, by the looks of it, yes, ISO 27000 is a lot more involved and heavier, but I'm surely there's some alignment there in some respect, right?
Sure. So there are different things, and that just take me a few minutes to explain that. So Cyber Essentials is very much around some very specific security controls you can put in place. Things like, are your firewalls correctly configured? Have you got anti-malware? Are you doing patching? Have you got sort of good user access control with 2-factor authentication? So it's a very, very technical things that you must do.
Sure.
ISO 27001 is much more about a business management framework, about how am I going to assess the risks in my business and what controls do I then need to put in place to manage those risks. Now, those controls may well be those things that I just listed for Cyber Essentials.
Sure.
So that's kind of the difference, is that one's the controls, Cyber Essentials is the controls, whereas ISO 27001 is the management framework to make sure that those controls are working effectively.
Sure.
So I don't see it as an either or. I think that they complement themselves very well.
Yeah.
I think there is another element that some SMEs are finding quite interesting, and that's the IASME organization, which stands for Information Assurance for SMEs. They've put their own information management standard for SMEs in place, And it's kind of a halfway house between the two. So it looks at the Cyber Essentials controls and says, these are the management practices that you need to implement those controls well. So it's sort of I don't like the term, but in my mind, it's an ISO 27001 light. Sort of we see it as a stepping stone to get towards 27001.
Yeah, correct. And whilst you were talking there, I was thinking, well, Cyber Essentials seems very prescriptive, so it's like laying the foundations for an uplift for 27001 in the future if you wanted to go down that path.
And I think it's all part of a company's maturity. So, typical maturity models of have I got the controls in place? Yeah. Are those controls monitored? And am I now acting upon that monitoring as I go up the maturity level?
Sure. Okay, great stuff. So, for an SME who may not have the budget or the capabilities in-house to actually execute all aspects of this, are there any support or incentives for them to do this? What would you say the incentives are for SMEs to actually seek to get Cyber Essentials?
Yeah, so I think in the early days of Cyber Essentials, that there weren't that many incentives, but I think we're now starting to see those come to market, and there are two that really spring to mind, but both of which are kind of really interesting. The first is that we are starting to see some insurance companies, so this is business insurance companies, starting to offer discounts to companies that have Cyber Essentials.
Okay.
And I guess that's because they're looking at it, this reduces the corporate risk, so therefore there's a lower chance that we'll have to pay out on the insurance policy. So that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure the discounts offered yet are sufficiently financially inducing in their own right to force you down that road, but it's kind of an interesting path.
Sure.
But more importantly, we're seeing the public sector procurement really starting to ask for this. The defence supply chain has led the way, where it is now mandatory for a number of environments, but public sector in general is starting to ask for it in their procurements, and not only of the direct organisation that they contract with, but looking about how that flows down the supply chain.
Sure.
And I think it's that flowing down the supply chain that is really interesting, because as you do that, actually the number of businesses that somewhere or the other supply to government are, most companies have that role somewhere along the lines, and so actually it is forcing Cyber Essentials across a very wide spectrum of businesses in the UK.
Yeah, that's so true. And over the years, you've seen the slow adoption of ISO 27000, where it was nice to have, and those companies use it as a marketing tool, or they were just forced into that because of a procurement aspect for their RFP. And now most companies see it as, this is a gold standard for security to build on, so we're going to go for it either way. It's not necessarily about the certification, but it's good practice. So I think the way it's going now, based on that trajectory, you talk about the supply chain, the government organizations are asking for it, it will slowly become the norm as well. And that's really good, because it's a way to push company to say, hey, you need to strive for a better standard if you want to process our data and work with us, which is really good.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so in respect of getting it, having it in place, and if a company doesn't have the capability in-house to support that, what are the different options available to SMEs in terms of getting certified, managing that system to make sure that it's updated and kept updated on a regular basis? Are there any companies out there, and how can SMEs get help in terms of managing this journey?
Sure. So you're certainly right. There's one of the elements of Cyber Essentials is how do you keep everything up to date. Certainly your certification is done as a snapshot in time, and you can get there, but how you then keep that up to date is an important part of the challenge, particularly where one of the controls is all of your applications and operating systems must be patched within 14 days of that patch becoming available. So that means you've got this constant moving target that you've got to achieve.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's where things like IASME's management framework and 27001 are really important, because they make sure that you've got the business processes to support that technical certification. But you're also absolutely right. Some SMEs just don't have the capability to do that internally, and that's not really a comment on the capability of the staff. It's just in a lot of businesses, it's not their focus. They've got their job is to focus on supporting the core mission of the business.
Sure.
So there are really a number of options. Really, there are, and depends on how you supply IT into the business. Clearly, some businesses take managed services for their IT, and so there are a number of the managed IT service providers ought to now be able to add Cyberesentials as part of that managed service. So that's one route. The other route is there's lots of consultancy organisations that will help out, and a lot of those have very much targeted that SME community, so are like realistic on their consultancy rates.
Yes. I'm sure. Sorry, does your company do that at the moment in terms of helping companies support the development of whether that be ISO 27000 or Cyberesentials? Is that something that Nexor does?
That's right. So we offer consultancy services, like many do, to help people with specific aspects of it, like maybe an assessment against Cyberesentials or particularly implementing a particular set of controls. But what we are finding is there's huge interest is one of the services that we offer, which is known as the virtual CISO. So again, bigger companies would typically have a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer. But at the SME end, it's not a full-time role, and that level of security expertise is probably not inside the business. So it's something that we offer to work with businesses as an initial onboarding piece, where we work with you to get to Cyberesentials, but then work with you over a period of time, maybe 1, maybe 2 days a month, just to keep on top of everything that you need to do, and so to offer that on a managed service basis. And again, that works very much in a similar way that you might have outsourced your IT management. Effectively, you're outsourcing the security management as a layer on top of that.
Sure. Okay, great stuff there, Colin. So in closing then, I'm a small company and I'm looking to go for Cyberesentials, and I'm torn between Cyberesentials and ISO 27001. Whichever one I go with, what would you say are the quick top tips for management or for the SME to think of when looking at going for these certifications?
So my top tips is, first of all, it has to start at the top. So this has to be a commitment from the CEO to say that yeah, this is what we need to do, because we have these business drivers that say we need this, and therefore it's what we're going to do. And then I would actually recommend that CEO goes and has a look at the National Cybersecurity Centre's website, where they've got this very, very helpful resource called the Board Security Toolkit.
Right.
And it takes you through 3 things that you really need to do, which is, one is understand what your assets are, so you know what's likely to be under threat.
Yes.
Takes you through how to do a risk assessment of that, so you understand what controls that you need, and then talks about how you monitor that to make sure that the controls you put in place are effective. And if you start with that framework, then you'll find that whether you go down the ISO 27001 framework or the Cyberesentials, you'll have that top level buy-in to provide the resources and the policies and the framework that you need to be able to successfully implement that.
Great stuff. Great top tips there, Colin. Thank you very much. We're at the close now for this session, but really some great top tips there and some great insight. And thank you very much for your time today. And you've been watching Talk InfoSec, myself, Clinton Walker, and Colin Robins from Nexor. You can watch us on YouTube, podcast, Overcast, Google, Spotify, and FM, Talk FM. Thank you very much. You've been watching Talk InfoSec. See you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.